The screaming had stopped an hour ago. She'd watched from her cage as they cut the Scottish boy's back open, broke his ribs outward, pulled his lungs through like wings. He screamed for 7 minutes before his body gave out. Now they were coming for her. And the worst part? Every Viking in the village was praying as they did it. Because in Norse culture, this wasn't murder. This was worship. And she was the sacrifice. This was the 9th century, the height of the Viking Age. But Vikings weren't just warriors. They were deeply religious. And their gods demanded blood. The Norse believed Odin, Thor, and Freya watched from Valhalla, judging every action. Divine favor had to be earned through sacrifice. When Viking longships appeared on the horizon, villagers didn't just fear death. They feared being taken alive. Because captives weren't slaves or hostages. They were offerings. Living sacrifices to gods who controlled the winds, the harvests, and every soul's fate. This was Uppsala, one of the holiest sites in the Viking world, where the boundary between the living and divine grew thin. Her name was Áine, 16 years old when Vikings came to her Irish village. She was gathering water to make her mother's healing tea, the one skill she'd finally mastered, the one thing that made her feel useful. Then she heard the screams. By the time she ran back, her home was burning. The raiders moved with terrifying efficiency. They killed the men who fought, took the women who ran. Áine tried to hide in the root cellar, but Vikings had done this 1,000 times. They knew where people hid. When they dragged her out, the raid leader studied her face, her hands, her teeth like livestock. Then he nodded. Young, healthy. She would do. The voyage to Scandinavia took 2 weeks. Áine was chained in the longship's bottom with 15 other captives. Some wept. Some prayed. Some went silent, minds already broken. The Vikings barely spoke to them. They were cargo now. Sacred cargo. When they reached Uppsala, Áine saw the tree. Bodies hanging from its branches. Some fresh, others just bones swaying in the wind like grim ornaments. An old woman approached. A Valva, a Norse priestess. She walked down the captive line slowly, whispering prayers. When she reached Áine, she paused, touched her face almost gently, like a mother, then smiled. This one, the Valva whispered. The gods have chosen. She leaned closer, her breath warm. I envy you. To walk with gods. I will never be worthy. Áine was separated and taken to a wooden hut. For 3 days she was fed rich food, venison, bread, honey mead. Her wounds were cleaned. They gave her new clothes, a white linen dress, beautifully embroidered. She didn't understand until the Valva returned. You are blessed. You will walk with gods. Your death will be meaningful. That's when Áine understood. The food, the care, it wasn't mercy. It was preparation. They were fattening a lamb for slaughter. The ritual would take place at the full moon. For 9 days, the village would celebrate the Blót, the great sacrifice festival. And on the 9th night, the human offerings would be given to the gods. Some captives would be hanged from the sacred tree. Others drowned in the holy bog. But a chosen few would undergo the blood eagle, the most agonizing death the Vikings knew. A thrall explained it to Áine. A slave named Bridget who'd survived only because she was pregnant. She'd been Irish too, taken 5 years ago from a coastal village. Now she spoke Norse better than her own language. They will cut your back open while you breathe, Bridget whispered, her voice hollow. Break your ribs outward like wings. Pull your lungs through the opening, draping them over your shoulders. You will die slowly, your last breaths visible to the gods. Áine wasn't alone. 5 others were chosen. A Scottish boy, twin brothers from Francia, an older woman, and a Christian monk clutching his wooden cross. Some Vikings visited them not to mock, but to explain. They wanted the captives to understand. This is not punishment, one warrior said. The gods need us. Without sacrifice, crops fail. Ships sink. Children are born dead. You are saving us. Áine spat in his face. He just nodded sadly and walked away. On the 7th night, the monk tried to run. They caught him at the tree line. That night, they hanged him from the sacred tree. His prayers turned to gurgles, then silence. By morning, crows had found him. Then the Vikings made an example. They took the Scottish boy, the one who'd whispered escape plans. They performed the blood eagle on him as a warning. Áine was forced to watch from her cage. The blade cut down his spine. They broke his ribs with ritual hammers, then reached inside and pulled his lungs through, draping them like grotesque wings. He screamed for 7 minutes. 7 eternal minutes. The Vikings prayed the entire time. Tears on some faces, not from horror, but religious ecstasy. Now there were 3 captives left, and Áine knew she was next. But something strange was happening outside. For 3 days, scouts had reported unfamiliar sails on the distant horizon. The Vikings were too consumed by ritual preparation to investigate. They believed the gods would protect them during the sacred blot. They were wrong. The morning of the blot arrived. The village was transformed. Carved runes, woven branches, offerings everywhere. Drums beat, horns sounded. The entire settlement gathered around the sacred tree. Áine and the others were led out in white robes, barefoot in frost. The crowd didn't jeer. This wasn't entertainment. It was communion. The chieftain raised his hands. Great Odin, accept these offerings. Protect our people. Guide us through winter. The crowd roared. The woman from the rival clan was hanged, then lowered into the bog with stones. Bubbles rose, then nothing. The twin brothers were drowned together in the sacred spring, hands tied to each other, grasping beneath the water. The blade pressed harder. And then, but the blade never fell. A horn blast shattered the chanting. Then another. The volva froze. The crowd fell silent. Everyone turned toward the fjord. Ships, dozens of them. Irish ships. A war fleet. Áine's village belonged to a larger kingdom. And the Irish king had finally had enough. While Vikings celebrated their blot, he'd sailed north following the raiders' route. He'd come for blood. Vikings scrambled for weapons. The chieftain shouted orders. The sacred ritual forgotten, survival took priority. In the confusion, Áine rolled off the altar. Hands still bound, she ran. She found Brigid, the thrall who'd warned her. Together they freed other slaves and fled as battle erupted. The Irish didn't just fight. They burned everything, tore down the sacred tree, showed Vikings the same mercy Vikings had shown others. None. Áine and 12 freed captives made it to the Irish ships. At first, the soldiers almost killed them. In white robes, they looked like Norse priestesses. But when Áine spoke Irish, when she fell weeping, they understood. By nightfall, the Viking settlement was ash. Most warriors dead. Survivors fled into frozen wilderness, their sacred grove destroyed. Áine sailed home, but she was never the same. She couldn't sleep without seeing the altar. The Scottish boys' screams echoed every night. 7 minutes she'd never forget. The surviving Vikings said the gods were angry the ritual was interrupted. That divine punishment followed. So they did more blots, more captives, more blood. The cycle continued. The Vikings called it sacred. The captives called it murder. Archaeological evidence across Scandinavia has uncovered hundreds of bodies in sacred bogs, beneath temples, hanging in groves. Vikings practiced human sacrifice for centuries, believing it necessary for survival. And from their perspective, it worked. Their crops grew. Ships returned safely. They had no reason to doubt. To them, captives weren't victims. They were necessary. But Áine never forgave. And neither did the Irish. Celtic kingdoms, Saxon armies, Frankish forces, all eventually struck back. The Viking Age didn't end because Norse stopped raiding. It ended because their victims stopped running. By the 11th century, Christianity spread through Scandinavia. The old gods faded. Sacred groves were cut down. The blot rituals stopped. Not because Vikings found them horrifying. They stopped because the religion changed. The violence didn't. Áine lived to 63. Never married. Never had children. She spent every winter inside, away from the full moon. She said she could still hear the chanting. Still feel the cold altar. Still hear the Scottish boy screaming. She'd been saved, but never truly escaped. History remembers Vikings as explorers, warriors, traders. But they were also this. Believers in a faith so absolute that strangers' suffering became worship. Most captives have no names, no stories, just bones in bogs. Except for Áine. She made sure someone remembered. So ask yourself, if faith demands others' suffering to prove its worth, is it still faith? Or just violence, dressed in ceremony?